What sounds like fiction, but is actually a real historical event?
The death of Ken Rex McElroy. He terrorized Skidmore, Missouri for decades, stalking, assaulting, murdering and raping two 14-year-olds who were his wives. He had an expensive attorney, so he was never charged. The law never helped the poor town. One day, the town gathered for a meeting on how to deal with McElroy. Details get a little vague here, but apparently, someone alerted the room that McElroy was in the bar up the street. Quietly and calmly, everyone got up and walked over to the bar. As McElroy got into his truck, someone shot him in the back of the head. The town just went back to their business. When the witnesses, like the entire town, were questioned, everyone claimed they didn't see anything. No one has ever been arrested.
In 1980, Lake Pennor in Louisiana drained like a bathtub with the plug removed. Oil drillers on a rig in the lake had hit a mine shaft below. The rig, barges, a tugboat and part of a nearby island got sucked into the largest man-made whirlpool ever.
Operation Mincemeat. The Allies planted a dead body with fake battle plans to trick the Germans into thinking that the Allies were going to attack Sardinia when they were in fact going to attack Sicily. They built an entire life for this dead, fake, military man, dumped him in the ocean, and successfully distracted the Germans.
Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel in 1838 in which 4 shipwrecked survivors, at the point of starvation, choose to resort to cannibalism. So they kill the young cabin boy, Richard Parker, and eat him. In 1884, a ship called the Mignonette sank. 4 crew members survived. At the point of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest of them, Richard Parker.
In 1971, a teenage girl named Julianne Koki was on a plane that was struck by lightning and disintegrated in the air. She plummeted 3,000 meters strapped to her seat and landed in the Amazon rainforest. Her mom had been on the flight with her, and Julianne searched in vain for her mom, but Julianne was the sole survivor of the crash. She survived 11 days alone, treating her maggot-infested wounds with fuel and using tracking techniques her father had taught her before she found the boat that she used to make her way back to civilization. What an absolute legend.
The CIA was researching psychic abilities for 30 years as a way to spy on the USSR. After 30 years, the program was terminated, and their conclusion was that psychic powers probably don't exist. Edit. The actual conclusion was that the evidence for remote viewing was unfalsifiable, and therefore unprovable. Many of the more promising results were believed to be caused by information leakage, meaning that test subjects had prior knowledge about the subject they were asked about. They were unable to verify any of their results because of this, and even if the psychic abilities were real, they were unreliable at best. The escape from Antarctica by the members of the Antarctic expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. The stuff they went through was unbelievable. Their boat, the Endurance, was crushed by ice floes. They were stranded on the floes for over a year in temperatures well below freezing. They then took to 3 boats around 22 feet in length across the Antarctic Ocean looking for land. There were about 10 men in each boat. They missed reaching land by just a few miles at times. 2/3 of them got stranded on Elephant Island surrounded by ice, while one of the boats went out in search of rescue. That boat made it through the Drake Passage, one of the deadliest places in the ocean. All but 3 of them got stranded with little food and water, while the 3 men who left became the first people to cross South Georgia on foot. They found civilization, rescued the men who came through the Drake Passage, waited months until they could rescue those on Elephant Island. Every single person who came on the initial voyage survived, with the worst lasting consequence being a single foot amputation.
Apparently, death from laughter is an incredibly rare but completely legit cause of death. In the 3rd century BCE, Chrysippus, a Greek Stoic philosopher, died of laughter after he saw a donkey eating his figs. And Chrysippus is not the only isolated case. Among the few other cases, a 5th century BCE Greek painter, Zeuxis, is said to have died laughing at his painting of the goddess Aphrodite, for which an old woman, who had commissioned the painting, had insisted on modeling. Also, Cleopatra, the ruler of Egypt in the 1st century BCE, claimed that her retainer died laughing at her husband's death. According to the linked Wikipedia article, the most recent case is that of Ole Benson, a Danish audiologist, who saw a funny scene in a comedy film and laughed so hard that his heart rate rose to a point where he had a fatal heart attack in 1989. From what I understood from reading up on this topic, it's not the act of laughing itself but rather a fatal repercussion from a fit of laughter, such as cardiac arrest, asphyxiation or aneurysm, which causes death. For instance, Ole Benson suffered a heart attack as a consequence of the terrible fit of laughter he had. It's possible that such was the case of Chrysippus, and others, as well. I always thought of "I'm gonna die laughing" as a hyperbole, and I myself use it quite liberally. But I guess every hyperbole has a grain of truth to it.
The Bone Wars. Two rival paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, were in a race for academic clout, so they both took off to places like the fossil beds of Montana and Utah to try and dig up as many dinosaurs as possible before the other guy. But they didn't stop there, and hired spies and saboteurs to impede the other's work, as well as trying to pass off sloppy or fake skeletons sometimes. The overwhelming majority of iconic dinosaur genres that we know were either first discovered or simply got a lot of new samples to work with, and were made iconic by the amount of publicity they received. This includes Triceratops, Stegosaurus, some remains of Tyrannosaurus, Apatosaurus, and many, many more. This is also where the Brontosaurus confusion comes from. One of the scientists, I forget who, had already discovered Apatosaurus. The other then discovered a new skeleton of the same dinosaur, but intentionally put a skull from a different species, Camarasaurus, onto that skeleton and tried to pass it off as a new species entirely, Brontosaurus. The fake was unveiled pretty quickly, but the name stuck. More recently, however, we have a lot more tools to distinguish smaller features from bones, and it was found that the skeleton that was originally passed off as Brontosaurus is actually barely different enough to receive its own genus, and the name Brontosaurus was revived. I've always thought that this could make a fantastic show, especially if it includes dramatized flashbacks to how the dinosaurs in the skeletons died. Edit, the Wikipedia page's intro describes it very nicely as well. The Bone Wars, also known as the Great Dinosaur Rush, was a period of intense and ruthlessly competitive fossil hunting and discovery during the Gilded Age of American history, marked by a heated rivalry between Edward Drinker Cope, of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, and Othniel Charles Marsh, of the Peabody Museum of Natural History at Yale. Each of the two paleontologists used underhanded methods to try to outdo the other in the field, resorting to bribery, theft, and the destruction of bones. Each scientist also sought to ruin his rival's reputation and cut off his funding, using attacks in scientific publications. Edit, it's worth noting that the Bone Wars have had a massive positive legacy on paleontology as a field, but left both scientists financially and socially ruined. It was an excellent bittersweet ending.
Joshua Norton was just this random crazy guy from San Francisco who hated all this political nonsense that was going on at the time and figured he could do the job better at it himself, and thus the Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico was born. While he held no real power, the people liked him so much that they treated him like royalty anyways. Any currency issued under his name was treated as real money at many establishments. One day, he was arrested by a private security force because of his mental health, which enraged practically all of San Francisco. The police chief let him go because he had committed no crime, and Norton gave an imperial pardon to the guy who arrested him. After this incident, any police officer Norton passed would salute him. Another time, when a riot had formed and was getting pretty violent, Norton simply stood in front of the mob and calmly prayed, which managed to disperse the mob. And that's not even a fraction of the crazy stuff that he did.
Sergeant Stubby. During World War I, a soldier found a stray dog when training on the Yale University campus and took a liking to him. The soldier snuck the dog onto the ship when he had to leave campus, and when the dog was found by the commanding officer, he was allowed to stay because he had learned how to salute. Stubby was injured a few times during the war, but he was useful with alerting his squad of surprise mustard gas attacks and gunshots before the human ear could detect the sound. He also found and comforted wounded soldiers and caught a German soldier by the leg of his pants until American soldiers got to him. AKA the bestest boy to ever live.
During World War II, the US military researched the idea of dropping bombs filled with bats with attached incendiary devices over Japan. A dental surgeon, Adams, who was an acquaintance of Eleanor Roosevelt, wrote the idea to her. He explained that bats would nest in the wooden buildings of Tokyo, and then the delayed timers on the incendiary devices would go off simultaneously and cause a massive fire. President Roosevelt approved the idea for the study. The military found it would be highly effective compared to traditional firebombing campaigns. The only reason the plan wasn't implemented was that the bat bombs wouldn't have been combat ready until mid-1945, so they used the atomic bombs instead. Highly recommend reading the article. So many crazy details, the entire thing reads like a surreal satirical article.
Timothy Dexter was frequently given terrible business advice that would somehow, through a stroke of luck, pay off. He sold coal to Newcastle and made a profit. He became insanely wealthy, dressed in a strange manner, and acted weird in the company of the incredibly wealthy elite he had accidentally stumbled into. He spent a lot of time basically gaslighting his own wife for his own amusement. For quite some time he acted as if she had died and was a ghost, even introducing her to other people as his wife's ghost. He at one point even faked his own death so he could see how people would react at his funeral. He also wrote a book that was a long-winded rant about everything that upset him. The book included no punctuation. He made a second edition with several pages of punctuation attached to the end that the reader could distribute as they saw fit. Basically a real-life shitpost.